picking rocks on my daddy's farm.
I'm perched on the fender of the tractor, clutching the rim that curves over the big tractor tire. It's 1966. I'm 8 years old. There's just enough room for my dad on the padded driver's seat as we mow the wide fields of alfalfa that cover over half of our farmland at Route 3, Fairmont, Minnesota. The blades of the sickle bar hum back and forth, leaving the alfalfa laying flat in the wake behind us. I breathe in the sweet, earthy smell and feel a peace, like the kind of peace I'd heard the pastor talk about when he read from the Bible, a peace that passes all understanding. You know, Pinko, these alfalfa roots, they go down deep. He downshifts and the roar of the tractor engine softens. These roots hold moisture in the soil, lets the land rest before we plant a corn crop on it next year. That's what's called crop rotation. He pulls the bill of his cap down to shade his eyes from the sun as we turn around the end rows. His gaze wanders the wide, wide fields and the big, big sky. You know what else is good about alfalfa? He stops the tractor and looks at me to make sure I understand. These plants take nitrogen from the air, pull it down to the roots, and those roots feed the soil. Feeds our soul, too. That's Mother Nature taking care of us. And God helps those who help themselves. It's a partnership, Squirrely. It's a partnership. After our big noon meal, I race down the hall to Dad's office. It's lined with paneled walls, and the window faces east down the half-mile gravel lane that leads to our house. Dad sits behind his L-shaped desk that's stacked with ledgers and farming magazines and weekly church bulletins. I watch him read. Then he'll scribble notes on scraps of paper, and like a jack-in-the-box, he springs up and takes his newborn idea out to the shop, and I follow him. I already know the difference between a straight edge and a Phillips. I know where he keeps the WD-40 and the Allen wrenches and hand them to him like a nurse handing tools to a surgeon. My dad isn't the kind of farmer who wears overalls. Even when he's out in the shop or in the field, he wears freshly pressed jeans, a plaid shirt, tucked in with a belt. And he never leaves the house without his hat that he always takes off and leaves on a hook at the back door. At the dinner table, the conversation is chaotic. Everyone interrupts each other before anyone can finish a sentence. I don't even bother trying to say anything. I steal a look at Dad, and he looks back at me. And we have an entire conversation with our eyes. When we go to buy parts at Raby Implement Dealership, where all the shiny new tractors are lined up, the orange Alice Chalmers, the red International Harvesters, and the green John Deeres, all the guys are talking about the latest models. I'm quiet. Dad says, "She's the girl who speaks with her eyebrows." Gives me a nudge. At night, as Jackie and I settle in the double bed we share, Dad comes in and reads to us from the Lutheran Daily Devotional. "Then God said, 'Behold, I have given you every seed-bearing plant on the face of all the earth, and all the trees whose fruit contains seed. They will be yours for food. And every beast of the earth, and every bird in the sky, every creature that crawls upon the earth, everything that has the breath of life in it, I have given green plants for food. I wake just before dawn to the sound of the sparrows. Blended with an occasional coo, coo, coo of a mourning dove who sounds like she's half laughing and half crying. Mom's on her way down the hallway toward our bedroom. She's singing to herself. I keep a close watch on this heart of mine. I keep my eyes wide open all the time. She opens her bedroom door. It's time to rise and shine. It's a good day for walking the beans. If we leave now, we can beat the heat and we'll be done by 1. Mom's already in her cutoff jeans and a t-shirt. She's got a couple boxes of cereal and a jug of milk on the table. We eat as fast as we can, standing up, and follow her down the long hallway past Dad's office, where he's already busy behind a mountain of paperwork. We hurry out the back door and out to the shop where we store the tools and the pickup and the lawnmower. Mom waves her hand at the row of freshly sharpened hoes as if she's presenting an array of gemstones. I pick the one with the red handle. It's heavy and taller than I am. We walk down the lane. You can see where we've already worked because half of the field of knee-high soybeans has random volunteer corn growing up in it, and the other half, where we've already worked, is clean. We each walk down between 2 rows of soybeans, scanning the outer 2 rows for weeds. My brother Bruce takes the first 4 rows, Jackie takes the next, I take the next, and Mom takes the last. I see a cocklebur, and it pulls out easily. We just leave it laying in the dirt, and the sun bakes it until it's dead. A few feet later, I see a milkweed. If I don't pull the milkweed out by the roots, the stem breaks in half, and the white sticky sap dries like glue all over my palms. This one has a young pod at the end of it because it's so young. But when it gets bigger, that pod opens up and the silk comes billowing out of it. During the war, my mom used to collect that silk and sell it for $0.01 a pound so they could make parachutes. Bruce yells out, "I hit a patch!" Mom, Jackie, and I jump over our rows, and we all groan in unison. There are thistles as far as we can see. I can't even get near them without being stabbed. I use the hoe edge to nudge the root loose, making sure I don't injure the roots of the soybeans that's right up next to it. But for the bigger ones, I have to raise the hoe up over my head and come down at a diagonal, making sure I get the entire root. Oh, it's getting hot. I'm starving. Mom's left sandwiches at the end of the row in a plastic container, but we can't eat until we get through all these thistles. Finally, when all those thistles are uprooted and baking in the sun, we collapse on the ground. And Mom gives us each a half a sandwich of leftover turkey and Velveeta cheese. We eat in silence, swatting flies and picking cockleburs out of our pants and socks. After 6 hours of battling weeds, I trudged back to the house. I'm covered in dirt and sap and soaked in sweat. We get paid on Saturday night, $1.25 an hour, minimum wage. Jackie, Bruce, and I line up outside Dad's office, and we go in one at a time. Jackie goes in first, and when she comes out, she walks by me without saying a word. Bruce goes in next, and when he comes out, he walks by me without saying a word. I go in last and hand Dad my sheet of paper where I've logged all my hours. Dad raises his hand, extends his index finger, and comes down on the adding machine and starts punching numbers. 6 hours on Monday, 7 hours on Tuesday and Wednesday, 6 hours on Thursday and Friday. The little roll of paper starts to spin. That's 32 hours. He turns his chair to face me. You know how much money you made this week, Pinko? 32 hours times $1.25 equals $40. Job well done. He opens a desk drawer and he pulls out a wad of tens and starts counting them, each one as it lands in the palm of my hand. 10, 20, 30, 40. And as your financial advisor, I suggest you put at least half of this into your savings account. We'll take it to the bank on Monday afternoon. We shake hands, and I put the money in my pocket. Tiny, here boy, Tiny. I'm standing in the middle of our big green lawn. Tiny didn't come home last night, and I haven't seen him all day. Tiny, here boy, Tiny. He's an overgrown chihuahua. A little bigger than most because he's mixed with something else. My Aunt Milda didn't want him, said we could have him, so we took him in. All of our neighbors had big dogs, German Shepherds, Dobermans, hunting dogs, dark-furred. Tiny was blonde, and Tiny was tiny. On a Minnesota farm, animals aren't allowed inside the house. But I spent whatever time I could with him. I'd take him in my bike basket and we'd ride down the gravel lanes, cornfields on either side. I told Tiny things that happened at school. Like one day, I told Tiny how I was thirsty, and I told the teacher that I needed a drink of water. Well, she just sneered at me. She said, "You can make your own water. Just swallow your spit." Well, I told Tiny that even though my mouth was dry and my lips were parched, and I kept thinking about that water faucet right outside the classroom door, I said, "I'm not even thirsty. I'm fine. Just like I do when I'm walking the beans. I'm fine." And another day, I told Tiny how I fell asleep in class. And when I woke up, the seat of my pants was wet. I felt the cold, slimy relief. And I looked under my chair and I saw a puddle of pee. My mom had to come and pick me up so I could go home and change my clothes. I refused to go back to school. I told Tiny everything. "Tiny, here boy, Tiny." I went out at night, wandering the fields. And again the next morning, "Tiny, Tiny." Walking down every road, just, "Tiny, where are you, Tiny?" Finally, the third day, Tiny still hadn't come home. I left my chicken noodle soup on the table and I walked to my bedroom. My mom, brother, and sister, they just kept talking. But Dad followed me. He sat down on the bed next to me and he said, "Now come on, Pinko, don't be so sad. You gotta remember, Tiny was just a dog." Then he walked out of my room and I collapsed back on my bed. Dad's words echoing, "Don't be so sad. Tiny was just a dog." But Tiny wasn't just a dog. Tiny was my best friend. But Dad never says anything that isn't true. Maybe Tiny was just a dog. Tiny was just a dog. Tiny was just a dog. I try to make my feelings go away. And I feel my body go numb. And all those feelings seem to get pushed up above my neck and get stuck there. I crawled under the covers in the clothes I've been wearing all day. Jackie comes in. She's 12. She's telling me about something. I don't know. I tried to listen, but nothing made any sense. Her words just turned circles around me. Every Sunday morning, we attend the 8 a.m. church service at Emmanuel Lutheran Church. Dad wears an expensive suit that fits him perfectly, with fine lines of pinstripes. Not the gangster kind, but the fine lines you can barely see. And he always takes whatever time he needs to pick out the perfect tie to suit his mood for the day. And he knows how to tie a double Windsor knot. Always has a pen in the top pocket. Mom dresses me in anklets, blue or pink or yellow, with matching blue or pink or yellow barrettes. As we walk in the church, time slows down. It's a huge cobblestone building with stained glass windows and towering ceilings, and an enormous pipe organ in the second floor balcony. We walk down the side aisle. Before going into the pew, I stall and pretend to tie my shoelace so Mom, Jackie, and Bruce go in first, and I end up sitting right next to Dad. He stares straight ahead at the pastor in the white robe standing high above us in the elevated pulpit. And then he flips over the bulletin, takes the pen out of his pocket, and draws a large upside-down L to signify he's up for a game of hangman. He draws 6 blanks underneath, each one representing a letter of a word he's thought up. He secretly slides the pen next to me, and I take the pen. I guess the first letter, and I'm guessing T. If it's not part of the word, he'll draw a large head, and I'm one step closer to death. I guess the letter T. He takes the pen and he fills in the 3rd and 4th blank with the letter T. I take the pen and fill in the rest of the word. C-A-T-T-L-E, cattle! I want to shout, but muffle my mouth. So it's not too loud. And Dad motions with his eyes back to the pastor who's quoting Deuteronomy 28:8. The Lord will send a blessing on your barns and everything you put your hand to. Dad makes a fist and covers it with his other hand and gives my arm a gentle punch. I do the same to him. It's our secret handshake. That night, it rains hard, It's too muddy for us to work in the beans, so I'm out in the field on my favorite cow, Debbie. She lets me sit on her as if she was a horse. And when you pet a cow, it's like a dog times 10. I get a lot of fur, a lot of pleasure. I see Dad pulling up in the truck, and he yells out the window, "Hey, Pinko, want to ride with me to the sale barn? We'll go right after I get these cattle loaded. I'll buy you a cherry nut ice cream cone." Well, I'm only 8, and this is the first time my dad's invited me to go with him to the sale barn, just the two of us. He walks really slowly out in the pasture, circling behind the cows, and then he picks up a rod with a rubber handle and he prods Debbie. She bellows and jolts when the rod hits her rear. Ha! And my dad's voice is so mean and hard, not at all like the daddy is when he's talking to me. He lunges for Debbie. Ha! And she runs up the chute and into the truck. She's got no other place to go. Dad slams the back gate down and gets in the driver's seat. "Come on, Pinko, let's go." I get in the seat next to my dad. I bite my lip and fight back tears. There's a routine to life on the farm. You plant the seeds in the spring, you walk the beans every summer, you harvest every fall. After praying for just the right amount of rain and just the right amount of sun for the corn to be knee-high by the 4th of July. And you milk the cows every day, morning and night. You milk them until you milk them dry. And then they turn into hamburgers. I'm 17. I'm sitting in the family room with Mom and Dad. My older brother and sister have left home. Every night we watch the 10 o'clock news. We get the latest on the commodity markets and the weather report. If it rains, Dad'll take more cows to the sale barn. But if it's sunny, we'll work in the fields. The anchor man, in a subdued voice, announces that on April 12th, Alice Cooper will be coming to the Mankato Stadium. Not many people know this, but I love Alice Cooper. He's wild. Yeah. He's wild and he's free and he sings and he dances and he doesn't care what anybody thinks. And he's going to be singing that song on my birthday. I'm 18, I just don't know what I want. 18, I gotta get away. At church the following Sunday, the minister tells a sermon about the prodigal son leaving home, awakening to a sin, and returning. We all stand and sing the hymns we always sing, everyone with their lips pressed tightly together and their jaws clenched. Onward, Christian soldiers, marching off to war. After the service, we gather in the basement for the pancake and greasy bacon breakfast with the cheap fake orange juice. All the parents are talking to each other, warning each other not to let their kids go to the Alice Cooper concert. They've seen him on album covers. He's got scraggly black hair down to his shoulders. He wears a leather coat with a top hat. He paints his fingernails black, and he has huge black circles around his eyeballs with a little bit of red dripping down that looks like blood. He paints a huge frown that extends beyond the corners of his lips. They've heard that when he's on stage, he uses real caskets and guillotines. They think he's an agent of the devil. I have every one of his 8-track cassettes in my car. A blue 1964 Chevy hardtop. And I sing along during my 15 minutes of freedom while driving to school. I used to be such a sweet, sweet thing till they got a hold of me. Dun, dun. I know all the lyrics by heart. School's out for summer. Welcome to my nightmare. I think you're gonna like it. I think you're gonna feel right at home. I have to see Alice Cooper on my 18th birthday. It's destiny. Mom, dressed in her usual casual boy style, cutoffs and a t-shirt, takes her roast out of the oven and sits it, still in the roasting pan, in the middle of the table. Dad spears potato and plops it onto his unbreakable Corral plate. Without looking up, he says, I got the highest bid for those 10 head of cattle I took to the market. They weighed in good. Then he set his fork down, looked me directly in the eyes and said, saw a poster while I was there for the Martin County Dairy Princess contest. You're gonna enter it, right, Pam? I stare at my plate and cut my meat and remind Dad how Jackie entered that contest 4 years ago and how she lost. Dad upends the ketchup bottle and pounds the bottom. A mountain of ketchup gushes out. Well, she tried. That's the important thing. You're the last daughter I got, Pam. I stare at my plate. I don't want to enter that contest. And me? I hate public speaking just like him. You're the last daughter, the last chance I'll have, Pam. Oh, this is the same night as Alice Cooper is going to be playing at the Mankato Stadium. My birthday, April 12th. But this means so much to my dad. He's on the board of directors for Mid-America Dairymen Association and wants to brag to all his buddies. My daughter is a dairy princess. See, I don't even like milk. I look at that glass, a pea-sized globule of yellow fat is swimming around the thick surface of the white liquid in my glass. And who would want to win this thing? I mean, the dairy princess has to ride around summertime all over southern Minnesota, sweating it up in a long evening gown, riding on the back of a big plastic cow with painted on red lips and a bright pink voluptuous udder. Maybe if I could just get 3rd or 4th place, that'd be good enough for my dad. Get my picture in the Fairmont Sentinel. Well, anyway, whoever wins that at the 4-H contest has to go on and compete at the Minnesota State Fair for Princess K of the Milky Way. And she's got to sit in a freezer while they carve her head out of a 90-pound block of grade A butter. Fairgoers walking around looking at the prize-winning roosters and heifers and her sitting with her fake diamond tiara for 6 hours as the sculptor chisels away. It's my 18th birthday. I'm at the Grenada High School in a classroom that's been converted to a dressing room. I'm putting on my yellow chiffon scratchy dress with the puff sleeves that zip the rest of the way to the wrist. And my mom zips up the back. Now just be yourself, honey. The MC walks in. 20 years ago, he was the quarterback of the Grenada High School football team, and he threw the pass for the touchdown, winning the game that people are still talking about today. He's gained about 50 pounds since then, and his belly leans out over his belted slacks. He wears a tie but no sport coat. He walks to the middle of the stage and says, "Welcome everybody to the 1976 Martin County Dairy Princess Contest. We're gonna dive right in, call up our first contestant, Rebecca Johnson." Well, Rebecca is the prettiest of the five of us. She has long, thick, dark hair, symmetrical features, high cheekbones, and a perfect natural smile. She didn't need any makeup. She wears an elegant dress, simple, straight lines. The MC asked her, "Well, could you see yourself working on a farm?" "Well, it's one thing to be a farmer's wife, and that's wonderful. But I want to work on the farm, not manage it. I've been studying about animal husbandry, how cows are bred for their genetics." "Whoa, she is smart as a whip. Such a pretty one, too. Barb Anderson." Barb is a large girl with big breasts and a wide girth that's cinched with a big pink cummerbund and a bow dripping down with ribbons. She has very full cheeks and a smile of crooked teeth. The MC asks her, "How many head of cows your dad milk?" "My dad milks over 100 head of cattle." She's breathless and excited, and her crooked smile lights up the room. "I think everyone should drink milk and eat cheese and put a little extra ice cream on their apple pie." "Whoa, she would make a fine dairy ambassador. Give her a hand." Pam Ziemann. I walk to the center of the stage in my yellow dress and take my place next to Barb. The MC asks, "What kind of cows does your dad milk?" I freeze. My mind goes completely blank. I can't remember. He gives me a hint. "Well, do you know if they are black and white or are they brown?" The crowd laughs. "The black and white kind are called Holsteins, and the brown ones are Guernseys." The crowd erupts in laughter. And like a near-death experience, I leave my body. And I'm floating high above, looking down at the scene, me standing there frozen in my yellow chiffon dress. I land back in my body when they announce the winner. "The winner is Barb Anderson." The crowd erupts in applause. I didn't even make third place. There were only 5 contestants. Barb has crooked teeth, and she could stand to lose a few pounds. Mom and I slip out the back. We don't talk to anybody. Our eyes down. We drive home all the way in silence. And when we get there, she says, "Now, honey, if you need a good cry, you just go out to the grove like I do. But when you're around people, you got to keep a stiff upper lip." I slam the car door. I storm off to my bedroom. I take off that dress. I put on my comfortable jeans and my favorite tie-dye t-shirt. Dad didn't even show up. I did it for him and he wasn't even there. Happy 18th birthday to me. I could have been at the Alice Cooper concert. No more Mr. Nice Guy. No more trying to please. A few months later, I leave for Mankato State, 50 miles north of the farm. I was the first one in my family to attend a 4-year university. I had driven up there a couple months before to figure out how to enroll and sign up for all the required classes. Dad said he'd pay for room and board if I paid for tuition, so I got a job at a fast food place selling hamburgers and fried apple pies. The day I left home, he comes out and leans in the window. He says, "You can take the girl off the farm," he says, "but you can never take the farm out of the girl." As I drive away, I watch him in the rearview mirror. He stands there for a long time. I go back to the farm on long weekends to help out and make a little extra money. During the summer break of my sophomore year, Dad's adopted a new methodology for weeding. He's got a D15 Alice Chalmer with a 20-foot metal bar on the top with 4 padded seats bolted on a few feet apart. Mom drives the tractor, and 3 of her friends and I sit in the seats and dangle over the crops. We each have a sprayer gun hooked up to a 100-gallon plastic tub of chemicals, and when we see a weed, we just give it a blast. And Mom keeps driving. We cover more ground in one day than what used to take us a week. No more walking in the sun and picking burrs out of our pants and socks. Just see a cockleburr, give it a blast. Mom shifts into a higher gear and says, "This new way of weeding is a godsend, isn't it, Pam? The rep from the chemical company told me that if we get the liquid on our hands, we should just rub a little dirt on it, and that will neutralize the effects." So that's what we do. We just rub a little dirt on our hands. At church the following Sunday, it's another long service with tight-lipped hymns, and I'm standing next to my dad, but we're no longer playing hangman, and we recite, "I, a poor, miserable sinner, do hereby confess all my sins and iniquities, for which I am heartily sorry." Okay, well, I'm sorry for some of the stuff I've done, but am I really miserable? Born that way? I try to catch Dad's eye, to get him to acknowledge how ridiculous it is for us to be calling ourselves miserable sinners. He stares straight ahead at the pastor without telling me, without any words, to pay attention. After getting my degree, I got a job as an underwriter for Residential Funding Corporation in Minneapolis. Now, I was used to cold winters, but that year, it was so brutal. I stayed up late studying the Places Rated Almanac. I wanted to find a place that had milder weather, mountains, and vegetarian restaurants. I decided to move to Seattle. I gave notice at my apartment, put whatever would fit in my little blue Toyota truck, and gave the rest away. I called Mom and Dad, said, "I've got big news. I'm driving down to tell you in person." 3 hours later, I'm sitting with Mom and Dad at the kitchen table. Mom pulls a roast out of the oven and sits it in the middle of the table. And before Dad has time to spear his first potato, I blurt out the news. I am moving to Seattle. Mom's bottom lip starts to quiver, and she struggles to smile. And she says she needs to get something from the fruit cellar, another jar of applesauce. She disappears down the back steps. Dad put his fork down, looks at me with his piercing blue eyes. And here I thought your news was going to be about me walking you down the aisle. I'm just going for a year, Dad, I say to reassure him and to reassure me. The next morning, before I leave, I wander out to the grove and I hear the sparrows. This could be the last time I hear them. At least for a while, until I come back. I wander further out to the pasture where a cow is rhythmically rubbing her neck on a white wooden fence, and she stops and stares at me. And I look back at her. Am I doing the right thing? Leaving the farm? But I don't want to be born in Minnesota, educated in Minnesota, married in Minnesota, and die in Minnesota, like so many people. Back at the truck, which is packed and ready to go, Dad's got a dipstick in one hand and a rag in the other. You want the oil to be above the minimum line and below the maximum line, he says to remind me. You want it right in between. He checks the tires, and when he's done, he hands me the gauge. They should all be at 35 PSI. Now, check them again when you stop for gas. Don't forget. He puts one arm around me, and I say, both arms, please, Dad. He puts his other arm around me, and I feel his shoulders go soft, and mine do too. And I feel our roots going deep, deep, deep into the earth. As I drive away, I watch him in the rearview mirror getting smaller and smaller. How can he take such good care of the animals and then shock them with electric prods? How can he castrate them and dehorn them without any anesthesia? How can he go to church and sing songs about Jesus and loving your neighbor as yourself and then tolerate jokes about Mexicans and Polish people? I don't know, I turn the corner and head for I-90 West. Every fall for the next 25 years, I fly back to Minnesota to help with the harvest. The farmers, after all of the plowing and planting and fertilizing and spraying the weeds and praying for just the right amount of rain, and after all the hours of maintaining the equipment and filling out government forms, you get to harvest. The farmers are like racehorses ready to bolt from the gate. As soon as the corn and soybeans are dry enough, every farmer, every family member, every hired hand heads for the fields. Dad drives back and forth in the combine with the corn header attached that grabs entire stalks of corn, shakes the ears loose, throws it into a belt that removes all the kernels, and then throws the stalk out into the soil that will later get plowed back into the field. Over the years, the corn head on the combine gets wider and wider and goes from harvesting 4 rows at a time to 8 rows to 12 rows at a time for soybeans. One late afternoon, I'm sitting beside Dad in the combine like I've done every fall since I was 8. He's telling me about the farm like he always does. He talks really loud over the roar of the engine. If your grandpa could see us now, Pam, harvesting all these rows at once, Remember when his machine picked one row at a time and then he'd have to pick those ears out one by one and run them through the sheller? It's getting late, and it's just about time for us to call it a day when Mom rounds a corner in the grain truck. She tosses up a couple sandwiches wrapped in foil and says, "They're forecasting heavy rain for tomorrow." Dad looks at me and says, "Well, you can go on in, Pam, but I'm going to pull an all-nighter." I force myself to stay up with him. We're in the N-Series silver gleaner that weighs over 20,000 pounds. This monster machine with the headlights shining down from the top of the cab rumbles through the dark of the night, acre after acre, picking the corn and shelling it all at the same time. The dust particles are swarming in the air. We look through the curved glass window for rocks, and Dad says, "Did you know they just approved genetically modified seed? We're going to increase crop productivity more than we ever thought possible." By 2010, I'm sitting beside him in our new combine, and he says, "Look at these fields. Look at how clean they are. No weeds anywhere, thanks to Roundup. This new technology lets one farmer do what used to take 20 farmers to do. It's a whole system." And as he turns a corner, he pauses for a moment, and he tells me how he signed a contract promising not to use his seed anymore. And for a brief flash, his smile falls away. But then he puts on his Minnesota happy face, his Minnesota nice, and says, "It's a whole system, Pam. It's a system to feed the whole world. We are going to feed the whole world, Pamela." I look out at the cornfields that go for miles and miles and miles and ask him why there's no more alfalfa. "Corn's worth more," he says. "Takes every acre we've got to pay for these computerized combines. We got to update the grain trucks every couple of years, and the tractors and the property taxes and the insurance, they just keep going up. Like the Secretary of Ag said, you got to get big or get out." I think about that time when I was 8, sitting beside him on the tractor, and how he told me that the alfalfa let the land rest, and how the roots collected all that nitrogen that would feed the soil, and how he told me that Mother Nature would take care of us if we took care of her. I want to ask him how he can use pesticides that kill the earthworms that aerate the soil, and the ladybugs that eat the aphids. I want to ask him if he knows that the monarch butterflies are all dying because the milkweed's gone. I want to ask him why the soil that we used to run our fingers through is now so hard and dry. I want to ask him how he can put poison in the soil that stays there for years and years and years and years. But I don't say anything. I just look out onto the horizon where the sun is setting and the sky changes from a pink to a purple to a dark blue night sky, and the first star appears. Back in Seattle, my friend Dave wants me to come with him to the March Against Monsanto. It's 2013, and by then I'm only eating organic food and donating money to the Organic Seed Alliance. He wants me to hold up a sign saying, farmer's daughter. I don't want to be a face on the news. When he asked me about my father's farming practices, I changed the subject. I don't tell him that the weeds are becoming more and more resistant to Roundup and need heavier and heavier doses. I don't tell him that my mom has just been diagnosed with multiple myeloma. I don't go to the march. I read about it the next day in the Seattle Times. Every time I go back to the farm, I go with Mom to the Fairmont clinic where they wheel her frail little body to the back room with the plastic sacks of chemo. Every time I leave, Dad comes out to the car, leans in the window and says, "You gotta pray for your mother, Pamela. You gotta pray for her." Every time I leave halfway down the gravel lane, I think about turning back and staying for just a couple more days. Every time I leave, I think it'll be the last time I see her alive. But it was Dad who led the way to the next world. I was back in Seattle, just about to go to bed when the phone rang. My mom called and said that Dad had taken a fall and he was being airlifted to Rochester. He had a brain bleed and he was going in for surgery. I asked her if I should come home and she said, "No, honey, why don't you just wait a couple days and we'll know more." As soon as I woke up, I FaceTimed Dad in the hospital. He had a feeding tube in his nostril, a brace around his neck, and IVs for fluids and drugs. I could barely make out his words, and I asked him to repeat himself over and over until we both knew that I understood. He told me how he remembered watching me ride my horse Sophie and jump over the cross rails we had set up near the grove. How impressed he was with my balance. How proud he was that I could ride so well. I never knew until then that he'd even been watching me, that he had seen me. I told him I'd see him again tomorrow on FaceTime. Well, either that or in the next world. I told him I loved him. I love you too, Pamela. The next day when I phoned his room, it just rang and rang and rang. And finally, an orderly picked up, and he told me that my dad had just died. I took the next flight out. My brother-in-law picked me up at the airport and drove me down to the funeral home. I wanted to go in alone. The funeral director leads me silently down a long hallway. And as he opens the door, I hold my breath. Then he leads me into this cold room with the white walls where my father's body is laying on a metal slab. He says, "I'll leave you alone with your father," he said, and shuts the door behind him. My dad is still in a sage green hospital gown. He's got a long scar down the side of his head, and his brow has softened and his jaw is not so tight. I'd never been with my dad before when he wasn't talking. My words just kind of bounce off the walls back to me. Well, you wouldn't believe the traffic getting here, Dad. It's quite the room they've got you in. I don't think I've ever seen you wear green. Don't worry. I'll pick out the perfect tie for you. What's it like? I touch his feet and remember all the foot rubs I'd given him. His hands are crossed over his diaphragm, and I look at the index finger when he was 4. The tip of it was cut off in a lawnmower accident. I put my hands over his. His hands, once so strong and powerful, are now cold. I put my ear to his chest. No heartbeat. Well, I knew there wouldn't be, but I had to feel it in my bones, to hear the silence and know that he was no longer here. I feel a peace then. Like the kind of peace I felt when I was riding next to him on the tractor 50 years ago when we were out in the alfalfa fields. A peace that passes all understanding. After the funeral, Mom and I ride in the hearse with my father's casket in the back, and a long line of cars follows us. As we turn from Highway 16 onto Bixby Road, Mom and I both gasp. There are 20 red tractors at the implement dealership, all facing the road with their lights on. 16 men. The mechanics, the salesman, and the manager all stand in a line with their heads bowed. A few miles down the road at the cemetery, we lower my father's casket into the grave, and I pick up a handful of dirt to shower over the casket, and the dirt is rich and dark and loamy. It was the kind of dirt my dad taught me to love. I let it shower over the casket, and it sprinkles onto the nameplate attached to the casket. Weldon Ziemann. A year later, my mom died from multiple myeloma, probably the result of her exposure to Roundup. She spent the last 2 months of her life in a hospice bed that we had set up in the living room so she could look out the windows, the picture windows, at the miles of fields. She wanted her body cremated. So after her funeral, we went to the ballpark and we released pink helium balloons, and we watched them go higher and higher and higher until they finally disappeared.
Wake up in the morning in the moonlight gray. We got dirt to break, we got a note to pay. I'm gonna plow to the end of the road. I'm gonna wake up in the morning and plow to the